In 1985, Robert Fulgham published a book that has gone on to sell 7 million copies. To give that perspective with other nonfiction books, it's in the league of biographies of Princess Diana and Nelson Mandela and The Diary of Anne Frank. The book is called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and in it, Fulgham lays out a handful of rules that we've all internalized on our way to adulthood. They're like share everything, play fair, clean up your own mess, don't take things that aren't yours, and when you go out in the world, watch out for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. You've probably noticed the problem with Fulgham's syrupy homespun advice. It's not the world we live in. Kindergarten bears no resemblance to capitalism. Capitalism's more like what you see in recess on the playground. Share everything? Sharing sounds noble, but capitalism says if you come up with an idea and patent it, those whom it's shared with have to pay you for its use. Sharing doesn't automatically mean you lose your competitive edge. Play fair? Sure, play by the rules, but know that the biggest rewards go to whoever understands the rules best. If your competitors are using a playbook, you should change how the game's played and beat everyone else in the process. Don't take things that aren't yours? Well, you shouldn't steal, of course, but marketing is literally the legal appropriation of someone else's audience. Pioneering R&D created a category only to see it get harvested by a fast-moving disruptor. To sum up, being a producer in our system is trying to outdo your fellow producers to win a consumer's business. You should use every exploit that capitalism allows to win. Our guest has been in and worked with many startups who've had to do this disrupting, showing them how to bend the rules in their favor. He's run conferences that have brought thousands of companies together to share these unfair advantages. He's also co-authored a book showing how to identify growth hacks using analytics. And in 2025, he and his co-author came out with the book telling us how we can bend these rules. It's called Just Evil Enough. So let's go now to Montreal to speak with Alistair Croll. Alistair Croll, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Hey, Alistair, what is the name of this latest book that you have co-authored?
The name is Just Evil Enough. And it's not actually about being evil, but the subtitle is the Subversive Marketing Handbook.
I think it could fulfill all of those. And I think one thing that is fair to say to anybody who might want to look at this book is it's going to challenge your preconceptions. Let's start by talking about how you leave in place most of the marketing theories, principles, which we've all been taught. They don't themselves form the complete picture for who your product or what your product is, who your market is, and all the rest. Why do you say that there's more that can be done in between the lines?
Two things. First of all, when you really boil it down, marketing is about capturing attention and turning it into a desired behavior. For a lot of startups, that's usually profitable demand, but if you're a political candidate, that could be votes, right? If you're an activist, that could be petitions. We don't think of that. I think marketing has kind of lost its way. Marketing thinks, I got to write a press release and a spec sheet and set up a social media calendar. Yeah, those are great, but why are you doing them? You're doing them to capture attention, which often you have to create because nobody cares if you don't make them, and then turn that into profitable demand. So that's our first take. That's much more important in 2025 than it was when many of the marketing theorists came up with this sort of 4 Ps of marketing, or 5, I don't remember how many there are now. It doesn't really recognize the incredible role that the medium plays in modern marketing. When you used to sit down and come up with a go-to-market strategy, your medium was like, oh, I'm going to run banner ads in bus stops, or maybe I'll send out a thing to the PR newswire and hopefully somebody will write a story about me. Today, the medium is how you put your shingle out, but it's also how people find you, how they test you in the SaaS era, if you're making software, how they purchase from you, even physical goods, how they receive the product in many cases with a digital product, how they get support for the product, how they tell their friends. So it's no longer sort of one way, one to many megaphone. It's now an any to any platform for all kinds of interaction. And yet we still delude ourselves that marketing is sort of this one-way outbound thing, which is why you've seen the growth of people like growth hackers and chief revenue officers and chief growth officers getting more involved in the technology stack, getting more involved in go-to-market.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dig a little bit more into some of that medium, but it helps us observe the system which we are in is so pervasive that we may not even see it around us. So, on that note, we have to recognize that the incumbents that most of us are probably trying to topple have already noticed and have already warped this system. Let's call it maybe the conventional value proposition that is being offered, and have gotten everybody to think that their way is the only way to do it.
We very often mistake norms for rules. And I think that's one of the things about the title is that we're not saying be evil. We're saying question the norms. When Coca-Cola first invented the coupon, and yes, Coca-Cola invented the coupon back in like the late 1800s, most people at the time were like, this is scandalous. This is going to destroy the economy. How will we handle inheritance law? Is this going to ruin the currency? Coupons aren't evil, but the incumbents didn't like them and as a result framed them that way. We've looked at over 400 case studies, about 160 in the book. The patterns are that someone who wins recognizes the system they're in, recognizes the status quo, and then tweaks something about it that gives them an unfair advantage or puts their competitors on their heels.
Many people, including the regulators, often buy it until someone else comes along and basically has that emperor new clothes moment where they say, well, actually, that's not the only way to do it. So we can talk about this, and I want to make a very clear distinction for people listening to this. You do, in so many places, outline a tactic, right? A solitary thing that can be done, and some might even call it a stunt that looks subversive. But then you also say, don't mistake it just for that. Subversiveness wears out. Sorry, a subversive tactic wears out, but subversiveness is forever, right? Long
Right.
live subversiveness.
These are like building blocks. We've identified 11 things that often people don't talk about, but when you go and look at what actually happened, it's almost always some combination of these archetypes. And another technique we talked about called value chain disruption that's behind why a particular incumbent came to market. So my co-author Emily and I have spent ages looking at this independently, and then about 8 years ago when we decided to collaborate on this together. And it was really nice having a man and a woman, someone in North America and someone in Europe, who have very different perspectives, because we got to arbitrage what we knew by seeing very different perspectives. It is astonishing how these patterns happen, but nobody talks about them. If you play poker, the rational way to play poker is statistics, right? I know what cards I have and I know what cards I've seen, and therefore I have this odds, so I should bet. But if we did that, if you imagine how boring poker would be if it was a stats game, like nobody would tune in. But millions of people watch the World Series of Poker because how it's actually played is bluffing. It's intimidating with your pot. It's anticipating other people's tells. Business has rules, but that's not how you play the game. And so I think it's sort of saying the quiet part out loud, that the reality of business is deploying these kinds of tactics in the right way to capture attention, mainly through the novelty of a new approach, and then build something that converts your target market's behavior into what you want.
For sure. And I think to even see what some of those are, we must be willing to maybe get ourselves a little bit out of the middle of the distribution curve and move to more towards, as you say, like a poker player or a mentalist or someone who has that, let's say, first principles approach, where they're like, I'm not just going to take anything at face value. I'm going to push boundaries here. And you use the phrase disagreeability to describe that. So could you take us through that?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that, because this is something Emily and I debated. Agreeability or disagreeability is one of the 5 sort of fundamental personality traits. And it's not the same as being disagreeable, which means you're a jerk. It's not the same as contradiction for contradiction's sake. Disagreeability specifically means that you are more interested in the results than what people think you should do. And so I'll give you a hockey example. And hockey players have caught up to this, but Glenn, I know you're a big hockey dad, so here
Yep.
goes. And you may know this, but if your hockey team is down by 1 point at the end of the game, how long before the end of the game should you pull the goalie? It's about 5 minutes. If you're down by 3 points, it's 17 minutes before you end the game. Like the entire third period, if you're down by 3 points, right? And people have sort of realized this now, but nobody was doing this. And there's a statistician, math guy that did this and did the math. It turns out that the reason we don't do it is because we're afraid of losing by 3 points.
But you're losing anyway.
Yeah, we're losing by 3 points. We're afraid of losing by 20. But you're already losing. So like the real game here is, did you win or lose, not how many points did you lose by. But if you come home to your friends and say, I lost by 20 points, they're going to laugh at you. And so why not pull the goalie? It's the rational thing to do. A disagreeable coach would pull the goalie 17 minutes before the end of the game if they are down by 3 points. But most coaches are more concerned with the shame of losing by 20 than they are with the math of increasing your chances of winning. That's a very good example.
Right. And you found something in a very, what I consider far afield study, the work of a fielder and their sense of how we have construal levels.
Right.
So if I got this right, it's the people who are maybe approaching that game before the game has even begun are like, okay, this opponent is going to probably stay tight with us in score and we're going to be at parity through the whole game. However, they go into the third period and you're down by 3 goals. So the thinking that they do going into that third period where they are very near to the situation and the very real possibility of losing is far different than the desirous thinking that they had when they were kind of on the bus on the way to the arena.
Humans build mental models of something and they build predictions in their heads about those models. The closer we are to the thing, and that could be temporally close, like as you said, the game's about to happen. It could be economically close with your peers, close because you identify with the person in the case. There's a bunch of different proximities. The closer you are, the more you care about facts and numbers. The further you are, the more you care about aspirations. So if you're selling timeshare to someone, and you're trying to get them, you say, look, think of all the years that you will spend here with your family. Think of how generous it'll be for you to invite your friends to stay at this place. Those are all aspirational things. If you're trying to get them to buy like right there, you're going to go, oh, we have simple financing and easy numbers and, we maintain the thing for you. All your marketing should be tailored. One of the dimensions is all your marketing should be tailored to the construal level here. You can make, if your benefits are more aspirational, then you can do things to make the customer feel more distant. If your product is very proximate, or if you make a product that's very objective, then you got to do so. For example, if I'm building software that is very powerful and has lots of features, then I might want to say, when you sit down at the keyboard, you will do these things and you will have these features. Whereas if I build software that's more esoteric, then I might say your career will be defined by the tools that you use, right? Entirely different marketing things, but I see so many people who are using objective hard facts for an aspirational product or vice versa and just fumbling the serve.
Every product that you are trying to compete against or every market that you are trying to win, these matters of psychology are at play and that you can use them well when you have a correct observation about them. Another one that I think does a very good job of this is the OODA loop, which I understand was brought up in the world of fighter jets.
The OODA loop, yeah. John Boyd is the person that Top Gun was written about. The instructor in Top Gun who could shoot down Tom Cruise in 60 seconds, that's an actual person. His name was John Boyd. He was a total maverick. It's actually kind of why Maverick was called Maverick. His whole insight, he's the reason that the US stopped building bigger and bigger fighter jets and started going to smaller, more agile ones. His whole thing is if you can get your cycle time inside the cycle time of your opponent, so you observe what they do and adjust and react to it faster than they can, your behavior will look like mystery to them and their behavior will be obvious to you. And so a lot of large organizations lose the ability to iterate quickly when in fact that is the fundamental sustainable advantage, is the ability to iterate fast.
We're leaning into the fact that a single tactic can be played by your opponent, and yet you can still, on the whole, be subversive in a way that you're always ahead of your opponent, because by the time that they are formulating that rebound, you've moved on to something else.
One of the tactics is called bug into feature. I'll give you an example of that. So Avis was the second biggest rental car company. And so they came up with this campaign that was like, we try harder. You know, you're number two, so you try harder. You got to catch up. Whereas number one is complacent. It took Hertz more than 10 years to counter that. Their final response, which they should have figured out right away, was find out why we're number one. And then the problem goes away. But it took them 10 years to figure that out, right? Salesforce had a crappy web-based product. It even predates Ajax and XML HTTP request for the technical nerds on the call. And it was so lame and had so few features that they decided to make the villain complexity, right? So that's a bug into feature. So being second or having an underpowered product, the bug, turning that bug into a feature is we try harder because we're second. Our product's simpler because we don't have a lot of features. So that's a tactic, right? Now, you can't go around as a car company and say, we try harder because number two. The pattern of identifying your bug, saying to yourself, what would it take to fix that? What would I have to give up if I fixed it? So if I had to make my software, if I had all the features I wanted in my software, it'd be much harder to configure. And then applying that to yourself. Make a list of the 10 things that you wish you had in your product or the 10 things your competitors kick you for. Write down the opposite of those things, and then find out if you can define a business position that makes those things assets, because for your competitors to respond to that, they would have to give up what is making them strong.
On identifying those things, there's actually a problem-solving framework that you mentioned that a Russian mathematician came up with.
Oh, yeah.
What he was trying to say was, look at whatever is existing and realize that they had engineering trade-offs they had to make. If
Right.
something is strong, it probably had to be heavy. Right? So if you
Every innovation comes from resolving a conflict between two conflicting features.
seemingly conflicting,
Right. The
right?
key
You
is to
come up
figure
with
out,
carbon nanofiber, all of a sudden that
right.
thing about it having to be heavy in order to be strong is not valid. But, and the
Yeah.
opposite of this, right? It's an
If listeners
advantage.
want to go down a rabbit hole, the framework is called TRIZ. It was written by a literally a guy in the gulag. It was this guy that protested how Stalin was doing innovation, and Stalin locked him up, and he kept writing. And it turns out he has this whole method and the secret weapon of some of the big companies out there. But he quite literally has this matrix of the 40 constraints on a 2x2 grid. And so you find out where your constraint is, and then it says, here's the 6 patterns that have historically resolved this. And they could be things from like the field of fluid dynamics or evolutionary theory. Like, he was an incredible polymath who clearly had nothing better to do than write down every single intersection. One of the things that was great about having the time to write this book, because Lean Analytics, the book I wrote before this, came out in 2012. My co-author, Emily, and I have both been fascinated by these things separately. And then when we decided to write the book together, there's just so much to explore that's not understood in the fields of psychology and innovation. You're hunting down innovation tools from the gulag or construal level theory from psychology. That's why this book is thick. It's a very thick book, but also why I'm so annoying at cocktail parties. There are just so many insights, and trying to, when you read a book, a lot of people who haven't written books think that it's like taking what's in your head and vomiting it onto the page and then correcting the typos. You're not buying the book for the information that's in it. You're buying the book for the way that the person who wrote it thought about the ideas so they could be ingested coherently. It's like when Neo plugs the thing into his jack and says, give me Kung Fu. How do I give you a framework or structure? And that's what took us the longest, was to we went through so many iterations of this and ultimately decided, like, if we couldn't teach this as a workshop or a course, it would not be a good book. There are parts you could just cherry pick. You could go through the 11 tactics and say, which one works for me? But if you really want to re-engineer your brain, if you want to see the matrix, as you put it, then you need to kind of step back and understand the systems you're in.
Yeah, and I've said already that you kind of leave existing marketing principles in place. However, you arrange them like you said, in a way that doesn't, melt the person's brain into a canvas. So the recon canvas begins with all of those solid standby things that we were taught about product and then market, and we've mentioned medium. So, we are figuring out not only product market fit, we're figuring out product market medium fit, and then you have even extended areas of the recon canvas. So is that your way of someone being able to roadmap their way towards subversiveness?
It's one of the tools for sure. I think the important thing to recognize, so the big disagreements in the recon canvas are, first of all, I mean, everybody knows your product is the sum of what you do and how you tell people about it. The product is the features and the positioning. Pretty simple. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. The market, we have a bit of a disagreement with. Normally, people think about market, they're like, oh, it's a group of people that look like our persona. Show me an average person. I've never seen an average person. Everybody's different, right? Market is really attention and action. It's how do you capture attention? So get a signal into someone's brain in the attention economy where they're inundated by noise. And then how do you get them to act on that signal? I think that is already a bit of a provocation because it means that your market is not, as I was taught in school, a group of people who are homogeneous within and heterogeneous. Thank you,
The
Professor
best
Schelling, Dalhousie, 1993, but it's not that anymore.
And the example you give, I think, is perfect. We can all identify with like a realtor trying to market a home in an urban area, and you say, this home happens to have a treehouse in the backyard.
Right,
So my market is not anybody looking for a home.
right.
It's that couple expecting or with having recently had a child. Again, we're back to the construal level of, oh, wouldn't that be a lovely scene? I'm, sharing pictures with the
Oh, I've done
grandkids.
talks where I explain how to make. So the goal in marketing is to make yourself the product they choose rather than one of the things they compare. And we define a market as a group whose attention can be captured and behavior can be changed using the same tactics. Now, that may be a bunch of people that fit into your persona. It also means that you may have several demographics whose attention can be captured and behavior changed in the same way. The biggest disagreement we have, obviously, is the medium, which is the fact that just as the product has features and positioning and the market has attention and action, the medium has the platforms and the norms. The platforms are like where the interaction's happening, which could be a newspaper, it could be FedEx, it could be Twitter, it could be a YouTube stream, whatever those things are. And that would be the platform. And then the norms are like what's okay there. So the things you would say on X are not the same things you would say on LinkedIn. So there are norms imposed by the users. Now, simply dividing the world up into six like that is already useful, but we had to go and make it more complicated. There are three different ways to look at those six things. There's objective things, right? I can tell you that this fridge has a certain number of kilowatt hours, this car has a certain amount of horsepower or fuel efficiency, and you can compare all the products, including a new product that I haven't told you anything about, based on those metrics. That would be an objective set of features. And then there's subjective stuff, which is like what's going on in your own brain. Motivated reasoning. Why do you do something? What story do you tell yourself to justify your behavior? That's a very personal thing, right?
If you're the founder of a company and just the origin is you slammed your fist down on a desk one day and said that it's got to be a better way and I'm going to do it.
Sure. Intangible benefits. Why do people pay $1,300 for a Supreme t-shirt when it's identical to a black t-shirt for $395?
And I can make it up on any Windows computer
And yeah,
font.
the reason is maybe they think they're going to be seen as cool or skip the line at a club. That's an intangible benefit that kind of lives rent free in your customer's head, right? And so you have to recognize that there are subjective and objective things, but there's also collective things. My friend David McCraney, in a book called How Minds Change, which is a fantastic book, quotes a social psychologist who said that we are more afraid of social death than real death. If you don't look at the world through three lenses, the objective, the subjective, and the collective lenses, you're missing some of the messages that are happening. I'll give you an example. I don't think this is in the book, but I love the example. You're familiar, of course, with OnlyFans. OnlyFans, if you're not familiar with it or pretending that you aren't, is an adult website where adult sex workers, mostly, can connect with their fans. It's a monetization platform. And it was founded by a father and son in England to be a way to connect with celebrities. A Ukrainian billionaire bought 75% of the company. He made his money selling adult porn websites. But what he did that was subversive was that he didn't actually sell access to those websites. He had a bunch of websites with names like stolenpasswords.com that you could go to and buy stolen passwords. So you could go to a website and buy what you thought was someone else's username and password. Guess what those usernames and passwords worked for? They worked for his porn sites. What he's done is separated the transaction, the paying for adult content, from the shame of buying adult content, right? I'm not the person who buys adult content, but I might be the person who buys stolen passwords from those weird perverts who buy adult content. It's actually a genius motivation, because what he's doing is he's letting you justify your behavior to yourself. He's appealing to motivated reasoning. It's much easier for someone who feels ashamed and doesn't necessarily want a website to track them.
Or you also point out in the book, state a factually incorrect thing. People will delight in the fact that they are correcting you about it. And,
Yeah.
even if you've
I think it's
gotten them off
Conway's
track
law.
of what
Yeah.
they were talking about.
You'll get a much better answer if you put a wrong answer out than if you ask people a question.
So the rationale in this person's mind is, haha, I'm more clever than those stupid idiots
Right.
who left their porn websites so simple or laying around somewhere, and I'm lifting that from them.
And also,
that's actually
I'm
that's
not
actually
giving
my
I'm not
accepted
actually
behavior, right? Not
Yeah.
the taboo of going into the site.
Right. And also, I don't want to enter my email address or personal information into a porn website. But if
I'm
I'm
happy to
entering
do
it
somebody
into a
else's.
site to get someone's thing, forget about the fact that he's just generated a custom password and username for you that will not, and he never confirmed or denied that this is how it worked. But that's a good, no, I'm not suggesting people should adopt this, but it is a way of thinking that you identify the behavior, the friction in the conversion, and you allow a person to justify that behavior. There are many other examples of this, but I think that's a good example of like a very subjective action.
Right.
And so in the Recon Canvas, we have these 18 squares. What they do is they let you look at the status quo of your market. So you go through it once and you write down like, what is going on in my market? What's the norm? And then you go through again and you go, what's the opposite of each of these things? Once you've done that, you look at those opposites and it shows you vulnerabilities. It shows you places where you could disagree with the market. You could have a different approach that is not only novel, but probably contains new strategies others haven't thought of.
Yeah, you've turned over those stones, and you mentioned a few, such as, we've all thought of counterfactuals. So there are things that when someone is buying your competitor's product, that the competitor is telling them you will get these things, you can flip that around and say, well, what if you had done something else? What would you be getting? So there's that. You mentioned counter temporals, which is what if you didn't do it when they told you to, you do it when I tell you to. There's counter personas, like what if you are not the person who's actually the best user of this product, somebody
Right.
else is. I think it extends into economics of you think this thing is scarce, it's actually very abundant.
But you perceive it as valuable because you've seen it for the first time. Yeah. So novelty is a hugely important tool. If you read how the human brain actually works, there's a great book called A Thousand Brains by Jeff Hawkins, one of the founders of Palm. He talks about how the neocortex is basically a prediction machine, that when you move your hand along a cup, your brain is predicting that the feeling will be smooth, so it notices a crack. In fact, if you look at how humans process language, there's pretty good evidence that we're not actually listening to what people say. What we're doing is predicting what they're going to say. And then when rhubarb, like that was a weird word. Why did I say rhubarb?
Right.
Oh, that's not what I predicted he was going to say. Now I'm paying attention, right? There's a Super Bowl ad that Coinbase ran. They just bounced a QR code around on the screen for 60 seconds. It was
60
rated
seconds.
Yeah, it was rated the worst Super Bowl ad of all time, or at least that year. 20 million visits to the website in that 60 seconds. So what they did is
it's more than enough time for somebody to go,
right.
All right, I'm
what
going
the
to
hell? And
what's there?
They recognize that people are bored, the ad's running, they were expecting something funny, and everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket. And since COVID, we all learned that we could use it to scan QR codes. Now, somebody else does a QR code bouncing around, you're going to think your TV's broken. But if they did it during the Super Bowl and it was the first one to be done, wow, that's a huge advantage. And their servers actually fell over. They got so much traffic. So that's a great example of like, what's the norm for Super Bowl ads? High production, famous stars. I think they spent $50 on the ad. The entire spend was the slot. but it worked better. It was more effective than almost any other ad that was run.
You mentioned norms, and this is an area where we must remind ourselves, and we humans are awful at this, that everything's in flux, including the mores of our species, which unfortunately is because we have such a fragmented media landscape, different information bubbles
Everybody's
where,
in a chat group where they feel like they're in the majority.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Me and all my friends. You give us a way to explore how we might see if something is on the cusp of changing. You mentioned the Overton window.
That's a name for the realm of acceptable political discourse. Basically, gay marriage 30 years ago, unthinkable. Today, pretty much the norm. Hopefully continues to be that way. If you can figure out something that everybody knows but hasn't become mainstream observation yet, that's a very powerful tool. There was a women's sanitary product company in Europe called Bodyform, and they were the first to use red liquid in ads for sanitary pads and tampons. And according to Emily, because I don't want to put words in women's mouth, like all the women that saw it breathed a collective sigh of relief that they didn't actually have blue blood. That was a hugely successful thing for them that galvanized public opinion because they were the first to say the thing out loud. It was hiding just on the other side of the Overton window. So identifying a thing that everybody knows, but nobody has said yet is a really powerful tool. There is a study across 25 countries, very well documented, thousands of respondents, that asked people if they would spend 1% of their income to fix climate change. Roughly 70% of people said yes.
Wow.
Then they asked them how many other people feel this way, and the response was less than 40%. That's a big problem because a very vocal minority can convince people they're in the majority, which is why we are where we are politically. If climate change activists really wanted to change behavior, they would invest less time telling people the facts are true and more time telling people everyone else knew the facts were true. That's what would actually change behavior because humans, we don't want to be socially ostracized for being too early or wrong on something. Normalize the fact that everyone feels this way. And I'm not going to name politicians, but lots of politicians say, people come up to me, everybody's saying, folks are saying, as opposed to these are the facts. I consider myself a pretty progressive person politically. I run a conference on digital government and modernization. I wish that we would learn these tricks. And one of the reasons that Emily and I wrote the book is we want to level the playing field. There was a quote that we wanted to put in the book, but it turns out that the costs of licensing music lyrics for a book are prohibitively high. So we wanted to use the Leonard Cohen song, the lyric that says
Everybody knows
the dice are loaded, right? We couldn't use that. So I think we put in something like, people are aware that the randomization tools are fixed. And then in the footnote, it says you're not allowed to copy things, but you can paraphrase them. But the quote I really wanted to use.
People put that together with you being a Montrealer, and there we go, Leonard Cohen.
The quote I really wanted to use is from a guy named Chris de Burgh. It's a song called Spanish Train. And at the end of the song, he says, and far away in some recess, the Lord and the devil are now playing chess. The devil still cheats and wins more souls. And as for the Lord, well, he's just doing his best. And I think we are complicit when you look at things like gerrymandering and court packing and so on. We are complicit. There's a famous statement that there's no such thing as a tolerant society because any tolerant society must be intolerant of intolerance.
Correct.
And I think we are not intolerant of the kinds of behaviors that lead to intolerance. And so I'd like to get progressives to realize that they need to be just evil enough, as opposed to saying, I want to build utopia, therefore I will be utopian in my attempt to build that.
Yeah. But it takes noticing things. Back to the window just for a second. It takes, like you mentioned, a study which looked across all of the views. The hotel who is being able to see that their housekeepers don't have to change the sheets and the towels that were never used because the little placard was left in the room. And we added together how many people who had been looking at the placard actually did the climate conscious thing, right?
The weirdest thing about that study is, so I think what you're referring to is if you see those tags in the hotel that say, please reuse your towels, and yours says other guests reuse their towels, you're much more likely to actually reuse them. The weirdest thing is if it says other people in this room reuse their towels, you're even more likely to comply. which makes no sense at all,
Because
right? I mean,
you never will see them.
there are a lot of things like that that are just weird human foibles.
I think you
I
called it
mean,
the Hawthorne effect, right? If somebody
the
feels that
Hawthorne
they're
effect's about
being watched.
observation. That one's really weird. So this comes from a place that was called the Hawthorne Works. I think it was
Yeah,
a factory.
yeah.
It wasn't very productive, so they sent in some researchers who changed the lighting and productivity went up. And then just for shits and giggles, one of the researchers decided to turn the lights down and productivity went up. And what they concluded was the act of being observed, of feeling like someone cares, is already enough to increase productivity. So if you wonder why your manager has needless meetings with you, there may be a reason for that. We may have lost it. But the weirdest consequence of that is if you put up a picture of an eye in a company cafeteria that has a like voluntary donation for coffee, more people will pay for their coffee just because or bicycle thefts on campus will go down because there's a picture of an eye. And like, there's so many weird things. We wanted it to be something you could read at the beach, but that could also be taught in schools. And actually, I got that to come true. I was guest lecturing at Stanford to a course on product management for like intro to product management. And a friend of mine sent me a photo of her reading it at the beach. So I think we threaded that needle. So it's really, yeah, we're trying to find the combination there.
So there we come at the, where is that boundary and when have you crossed over to become too evil? And you point out that it's when you don't care what your reputation is. And the one that kind of lit that up for me was the story about Chrysler. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
so the just quick backstory. I think it's the Federal Transportation Commission. There is a equation that they use to dictate how high or low the fuel economy is on vehicles, and that it is a attribute of the heavy to lightness of your fleet. And that as I read it, it seemed like the PT Cruiser, which, let's be honest, it was a weird looking vehicle.
Yeah. There's a very specific reason why it's so weird looking.
Right.
Yeah.
And that Chrysler didn't give a damn about the people who were buying the vehicle. They were slotting it in their fleet because, based on the chassis it was built on and how it kind of fit and made this equation work, it would enable them to make heavy trucks.
Yeah, it was considered a light truck because it had a flat bed. And as a result, it was lumped in with the other light trucks. And because it's a fairly economical small car, it brought the average fuel economy of the light trucks down below the federal threshold so they could keep making gas guzzlers for a few years. Is that something you're willing to do? I don't think you should. We have some specific things like don't actually be evil, which is a whole chapter.
Yep.
Don't commit fraud. Don't break the law. Don't assume consent, I think, is a really important one, right? Most evil comes when you think you're in sole possession of the truth or when you assume the consent of those who haven't given it. Those are the kind of patterns that make society really bad. So we devoted quite a lot of time. And frankly, Emily and I debated this a lot. How do we make it clear that we're talking about subversiveness, which often looks evil, like Coca-Cola's coupons, but isn't,
Right.
versus actual evil, which is taking away people's agency, performing criminal acts, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Blackmailing, extortion, etc. And I think one of the things is to think ahead a few moves, pointing out if you haven't made something that is truly in alignment with why your own company exists, that's something that your competitors will eventually be able to hoist you on your own petard with. You say,
I think that's happening right now, by the way. If anybody's listening, the biggest marketing opportunity right now I see is the enshittification of the world. If you're not familiar with that term, Cory Doctorow coined this term a couple of years ago.
yep.
Phase one,
And
Netflix
Andrew
is,
Chen also leaned into it with the
sure.
click-through theory.
Phase one is Netflix is $7.99. Oh, wow, that's way better than my $60 a month set-top box with HBO and stuff. Phase two is now I'm locking you in. You've gotten rid of your DVD player and DVD collection. I know your preferences. Phase three is, okay, now you've got Crave and Paramount Plus and Hulu and Netflix and HBO and Disney Plus, and I can keep going. And you're paying $150 for your streaming services. And now Amazon's showing you ads.
Yeah, this is better.
Wait, yeah. And so that happens across every industry because they start out with, especially in the tech world, they start up with growth, like Uber subsidizing to the tune of billions of dollars, underpriced rides. And then eventually when they've got market dominance, they ratchet the screws. I think there's a groundswell of awareness about this, that there's a company called Serif. They make 3 products: Affinity Photos, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Publisher. They are feature complete versions of Adobe InDesign, Adobe Photoshop, and Adobe Illustrator. Not exactly the same. Definitely Adobe has better features, but for 99% of the world, you can use their products. They are sold with a single one-time fee. This
Right.
was an example of someone going, how am I going to compete in the market? Adobe has huge bills, so they have to charge people a recurring fee. And they're like, no, we're going to build a cheap, simple version that works really well. And we're just going to sell you a software license. And they've done phenomenally, and they've created great products. So I think there is a play to be made to go up
Yeah.
against the enshittification of your industry.
And I'm glad you brought up software, because that's where I think this, through several turns of play, we can see where you are finding something that is subversive, but is still virtuous.
Right. Absolutely. In many
And
cases,
like you say, quote, when your competitors inevitably try to match you, that dimension must play to your strengths while exposing their weaknesses.
right.
And there's like no better example I can think of in software than open source, where you are saying to people, no tricks up my sleeve. And, if WordPress does it and Wix tries to take a run at them, it's going to be Wix that's hurt.
Once upon a time, furniture was built by you deciding what fabrics and so on and going to a studio, and then a carpenter would build your sofa and deliver it to you. And IKEA went, no, let's just get the customer to build it. Turns out that's really good for the planet. You can pack a lot more things on a train. It brought the costs way down. So that was good, but it was a disagreement with the status quo of how the furniture industry worked. When Robinhood said we will do free stock trades, what they did is instead of charging the user for the stock trades, the buyer of the stocks, they sold the volume of trades to a market maker that needed the other side of a transaction. If Schwab came along and said, great, we're going to try and compete with that, it destroys their whole business model. Netflix did this with late fees, right? Blockbuster was making most of its money off concession sales and late fees, and Netflix went, no late fees. So when an industry becomes enshittified, it starts to do things that annoy the customer. And if you can identify what the customer's annoyance is and then shout it from the rooftops so that people see you've made the part of their business model that they're dependent on the enemy, and you're the solution. That's a very, very good way to tap into pent up resentment quickly.
Yeah, that's excellent defensive ground that you can plant your flag and, as you say, claim your advantage on.
Also, a big lesson for the large companies that are worried. I mean, I've had a lot of people read this book who are big companies going, let me figure out. And several have told me they read the book and they're like, oh, now these three companies that I was dismissing are actually strategically important because it had made me do this. And they've changed their own business plans.
All's fair in love and war, but I think the reading of the book will still do more for the underdog, if for no other reason than they are ready to embrace a mindset that the book puts
Yeah,
in,
absolutely.
where my time in enterprise has shown me that more to lose mentality blinds them.
I'll tell you a quick story about that. I had another author tell me that her publisher wouldn't let her put the word chaos in the title of the book because they had a rule that if a CEO of a company is photographed reading the book, they should not have to explain why they're reading it.
Oh, come on.
So our book's called Just Evil Enough, right? We joked, we haven't done this yet, but we joked about making fake slipcovers you can print that are like the most boring, bland titles possible so that you could fold it around Just Evil Enough and hide the fact that you're reading this book. We haven't done it. It's not on there's not a lot of money there, but the idea is just to reinforce the fact of how stupid that is, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if you meant it or if I actually just took it off of there, but you were joking about the ability to sell coffee beans which come out of a mammal's arse, and I thought that would have been a good alternate. You could do that slip cover, make that a subtitle of the book too. That ought to get somebody to open it at the local bookstore.
For sure.
So speaking of bookstores, Alistair, where can people go to get their hands on a copy of Just Evil Enough?
If you want to help us, you can go buy it from justevilenough.com. But it is, of course, also available on Amazon and all major platforms. It's even available on Spotify as an audiobook. So you can go listen to the audiobook or buy the first edition hardcover on all major platforms. We just put it out there for everybody.
And because the subversiveness runs like a thread through it, you said this collaboration started 8 years ago, and you have been seeding the internet with teasers on Just Evil Enough for something like close to half that time.
Yeah, we have surprisingly good SEO for the book, but part of that is choosing a title that Googles well. Emily is a wizard at brand marketing and search engine marketing, so we did a lot of stuff to seed that. It's weird. A lot of people put up a website for the book when the book comes out. You should put out a website for the book when you start thinking about the book. There's a really good book on writing books called Write Useful Books that talks about the only real valuable thing for a book is recommendability. So that to me is a brilliant launch.
And showing people the practice of it, which is what you carry through even in publishing the book and in Easter eggs, such as Morse code in a chapter that talks about looking for signals in code.
Well, and
in
there's
noise.
Morse code in Leaf that Emily figured out how to make it hard for ChatGPT to parse the Morse code. We're not telling you how. You have to do it by hand as a human, but
Your
send me a mail
secret
telling
is
you
still
figured it.
safe.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is just a marvelous way of reinforcing to people. It's something you can do. It is something that you, frankly, must do. Relook at the terrain, figure out how you can claim high ground of your own, and do it without going full bore evil on them. Alistair, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to the end here. And I hope that you take away what Alistair has said to see better into your own marketing so that you can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.